Cameron, how are you?
Leon, I'm doing well. How are you?
Yeah, I'm really well, man. Nice scenery. Where are you?
Thank you. I'm here sitting in a beautiful log cabin in the deep in the woodlands of North Carolina in the United
Wow,
States.
wow.
Yeah.
And the reason?
I'm as creating Awakenpedia, the new spiritual platform. So I'm down here building out the platform, but focused on creation, video teachings, audios, just a lot of new stuff to put on the platform. So peace and quiet.
Wow.
Yeah.
And what's the motivation behind Awakenpedia? Obviously, I know, but let's share it with people.
Mhm. Yeah. So Awakenpedia, it's always hard to answer the questions of you know how did it come about, why did it come about, but ultimately, for me, it is an attempt to help other people prevent making the same mistake that my dad did, which was, as
Hmm.
he took his own life, and I am of the perspective and intuition that it was a result of his deep identification with the mind. And so as a result, his ego swelled so big that when the markets crashed in 2008 and his identity was wrapped up in the markets and in money in the material world, when that plummeted, so did he. And because he was so deeply identified with the mind, the weight was too much to bear. And so when the markets collapsed, he collapsed with it. And he unfortunately and erroneously took his own physical life when what he really wanted was to end his suffering, which was a death that existed on the level of mind, which was the death of his ego. And so with Awakenpedia, my aim is to help inspire that essence of self-realization in others so that they can realize they're not their minds. And if they are suffering, they don't have to end their actual life to end their suffering. They just have to shift their consciousness. So
Yeah.
that's the motivation for how Awakenpedia. I'd say at the genesis, of course, I went on my personal journey with my own struggling, my own suicidal ideation, my own identification with form through the mind, and I came to these realizations myself. And then I was able to connect the dots backwards to realize that this is what my dad was missing,
Mm.
and this is what so many people in the world today aren't yet seeing.
Mm.
But the tide is shifting, the collective energy frequency is shifting, and I just want to be a facilitator to help us move into the new age.
Wow. Yeah, one of my favorite quotes from the course of recent times has been nothing in the world is holier than helping one who asks for help.
Yeah.
And I know you and I have spoken about clearing trauma and how immediate, well, I don't know if it's immediate, but how the main thing that follows the clearing of the trauma is the realization to serve, exactly how you just articulated. You had an experience which is just, one of the most brutal experiences in human construct. And once you had been able to find a resolution in your own mind, the next thing to kick in was like, right, how can I help other people? And I think that's something just really so beautiful with people. And I appreciated from the very first moment that you and I started to talk on Instagram that there was a real honesty and a deep sharing that I can relate to as a musician. The content of my lyrics is not superficial. It's striking at the core, and it's interesting that people can have a perception with social media that friendships and connections can be superficial or they can be just somebody wants a like on their platform or whatnot, but there was something much deeper. I just felt that from that very first time that you kind of reached out and said, "Hey, you like Course in Miracles? So do I," and then you were, so honest about your story, and it struck me because there's so many parallels with my own story. In a sense, with my dad, didn't take his life physically, but he did take his life from himself and from the rest of us with a heroin addiction that lasted 20 years. That was then followed by an alcohol addiction, until in the end his body didn't allow him to get out the house to go to where he needed to go to get what he would have required, kind of thing. So that stopped him in the end from being able to pursue this same form of compensation that a lot of people look for in all sorts of external pursuits, trying to fill a void inside themselves with something from the external world.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, exactly. And thank you for your kind words, and just noticing what I was intuitively sensed through my transformation was the emanation that I felt within me, that I knew was emanating outwards, that others would receive if they were able to see it, to feel it, which is one of love and truth and authenticity and courage and light. When and it comes off so strong, I can sense it myself because I spent so much time in the dark. And it's like I became so thirsty for the truth and the light, and I spent so much time hiding behind ego masks that dropping them all and shedding all of that felt so refreshing, that putting myself out there with all of my flaws and imperfections and my addictions and my ego blocks and energy struggles, that to me it was liberating, just to be able to say, yes, this is who I am, this is where I am, this is what I've gone through, and here's why I'm doing what I'm doing, and to just really be so fully, truly behind it, as I know that I'm backed by God, backed by faith. And that's what gives me the support I need to have the willingness to be vulnerable and to put myself out here in this way. So yeah, it's just, and then with that, of course, in terms of others, you just become more compassionate, and you see that everyone else is where they are. They're at their level of consciousness. They're seeing the world from that level, and nothing's personal. So it's just about helping others to work through their own suffering to help them ascend in their journey.
Wow, beautiful. I'll tell you one thing that comes to mind listening to you say that is a recent bit of reading from A Course in Miracles, where it's saying, don't forget, you think that in your brother is a part of God, but actually in your brother, in everybody, is the entirety of God. There's no fragments, so every single person that we brush up against or we don't brush up against, they contain the whole of everything in them.
Yeah, exactly. We all have the entirety of the universe within us and of us. So yeah.
So how would you describe yourself in your role as the figurehead of Awakenpedia?
I describe myself as a co-creator. And what I really mean by that is I take no credit or responsibility or really any type of personal praise for any of this. I'm simply the medium and vessel through which God is expressed, consciousness is expressed. And that's the genius, right? I just had the wisdom to get out of the way so that the genius could express itself through my form.
Beautiful.
So that's why, I consider myself to be the co-creator, co-creating with God in partnership with the divine. Yeah.
Beautiful.
Just sharing wisdom, sharing insight, helping people to see through the insanity of their minds, the noise of the world, to correct their misperceptions, which is a big part of, the whole entire point of the course.
Absolutely, yeah, to try and give us a program to input. Well, the way I like to talk to people about it is to say, like, there's a program running in our minds, which is a program of interconnectedness and a program of love and kindness and all of these inherent properties. And that's our true nature. And we've inputted a second program that runs concurrently, but it actually runs in a more noisy fashion. So it actually can drown out our original true program. And the beautiful thing, as you know, about a course is like, it shows you the program that you're running. It shows you, it makes you look at the fear voice in complete, stark, stripped back kind of form and see exactly what you're investing in and what you're getting back from that investment and actually what price you're paying in terms of like happiness. And, a great thing about it is it'll sort of say, you don't have to believe in God. You don't have to believe in what I'm telling you. If you just try this, and then at the end of it, tell me or ask yourself, are you happier now that you've done this work than you were prior to doing it?
Yeah. It's like Buddha. You said, come see for yourself and walk the path yourself, as you must. And we're not, the course isn't teaching us anything we don't already know. That's the point, which is why it's like, everything already, you've just forgotten it. And this is a course of remembrance in which we help you to, as a reminder of what you already know based on what you already are. And so that's where it's so beautiful in its design and why it's so true and real, because it's not trying to convince us of anything or to instill new beliefs. It's trying to uproot all of those beliefs like weeds in a garden so that you can now have healthy, clean, fertile soil that is ready to, birth you into the new self, the pure self. That's
also I like your reference to almost like the polarity of like the darkness, the true experience of the darkness. Like we know that feeling of just like the darkness, and that gives us the counterpoint to the light. You know what it's like to be completely cast adrift from feeling peace. And then what does that mean when you do feel? I mean, my connection with peace these days, on a growing day-to-day basis, the relationship with peace is just, it's just blossoming day after day after day, because the memory of not being at peace is not something I try and hold in my mind and go, oh, remember when you weren't at peace. But the energetic imprint is obviously kicking around enough for me to be able to use that as like a polar opposite to just how wonderful it is to be at peace. And it's just through doing the work, isn't it?
Yeah. You just, and the paradoxical nature of the work is that, of course, it's really no work at all. It's no effort. It's an undoing. It's an unlearning, an unconditioning, right? And all of that serves to help you quiet the voice in the head so that you could hear that intuitive whisper of the inner voice.
Beautiful.
Right? So that you can shut down the voice of the false mind-made self so that you can hear the voice of the higher self. And so much in life right now, everyone, 95% plus of the world is so tapped in to the voice in the head. It's so loud. The noise of the world is so loud and their minds that they can't hear the inner voice that's there. And that's the whole point of the Course too. There's so many different ways to describe the essence of the Course, but one of them is, to help you shut down, turn off, quiet the voice in the head so that you can hear the inner voice, which is very much a process of exiting the mind in order to enter the heart.
Wow. I hope you've got a microphone over there.
Yeah.
And I think there's a potential lyric there. The noise of the world's got too loud. I like that.
Yeah. Yeah.
Wow. Yeah. You return as you go forward. The sort of paradoxical kind of reference that we get from A Course in Miracles. You return as you go forwards. It's like exactly what you're saying. You go back to what we are underneath the noise. So how did A Course in Miracles come into your life?
Yeah. Well, like how I feel it is for every earnest spiritual traveler, the teacher comes when the student's ready. And I had been going through such an intense struggle, period of deep suffering, what I describe now as my dark night of the soul, in which I was very deeply disturbed and lost and confused as to who I was and why I was suffering so deeply. Because I was, at that time, someone who was superficially dispositioned as being on top of the world, meaning, I went to Yale, I was working in private equity, I hundreds of thousands of dollars a year, had the toys, the cars, any sense pleasure I wanted was at my fingertips. And yet I still felt so deeply empty. And it made no sense because the world was saying, this is what will provide you fulfillment. And it, of course, it feels like a cliche now, but it's like, this is the way sometimes it just is so how it happens, how the truth becomes revealed. Disillusionment, right? Every illusion must end inevitably in disillusionment, which is the collapse of illusion. So the illusions that I made up in my mind that all of these things would provide salvation proved to be untrue. And that led to the essence of the identity crisis, which I call the dark night of the soul, which was very challenging, very unsettling, frightening. And I was struggling with suicidal ideation at that time. I didn't know if I didn't know what was on the other side. I didn't have any type of awareness that I do now in that sense. But instead of pulling the plug on myself, for some reason, I decided to surrender and lean in and investigate my inner world, as opposed to just giving up. And through that surrender, which was simply an acceptance of where I was, I became very thirsty for truth, for knowledge with a big K, not the little K. I became just so interested in trying to understand what was going on with me. So I started out more with people like Dispenza, who I feel are a nice bridge between the material world and the spiritual world because of the scientific approach. And so that helped me to just kind of create the foundational understanding of like this spiritual stuff isn't completely woo-woo and out there, and then I just kept leaning in, and more teachers kept presenting themselves to me, and I just couldn't get enough. And I fell into the books of Eckhart Tolle and Ram Dass and David R. Hawkins, a few other teachers, but those were the big ones for me. And then the bazooka of A Course in Miracles came into my life, and I just couldn't put it down. So strangely enough, it was actually, and maybe it's not strange actually now that I consider it, because it is a very advanced spiritual text, I feel, meaning that to fully appreciate what it's doing and what it's suggesting and saying about reality, you have to be ready, like, to hear it, to see it. You have to be at a ripe enough level of consciousness to fully appreciate and internalize the essence of the message. And so it came to me actually towards the end of this spiritual digest of a spiritual download of consciousness. And it was very validating for me at that time. When I came into, and this was about 2 years ago, when it came into, just about maybe 2.5 years ago. And every word just rang with truth. And I just knew that this was it. This was it. I knew I wouldn't have to read another spiritual book in my life to better or more so intuitively understand or know the truth in that way. You know, I think I could spend the rest of my life with ACIM and just go deeper into it, because it rings so purely with truth. So
do you get the sense that, I always say to people, it feels like it's information from outside the dream, even if I hadn't have known it was an inner dictation, there was something that my right-minded self just thought, whoa, hold on a minute, this information isn't from around here. This is, it's like excuse me, there's a guy called Donald Hoffman who I'm really mad on, and he does like comes at the neuroscience aspect of investigating consciousness, and he's kind of trying to push people further from saying space-time is fundamental to saying, look, space-time is just the stage, it's just the platform we're standing on. It's consciousness that's fundamental. Consciousness comes first, and then reality is like an epiphenomenon of consciousness. And he keeps using this metaphor, which I've seen a few other guys pick up now, which is simply the VR headset. And because of his knowledge of how the brain works, and because of his knowledge of how adaptive mechanisms within the mind and the perceptive sort of tools of our cognitive setup, if you like, he's able to present this metaphor of just saying, like, you've got the virtual reality headset on, and in that virtual reality headset, which is limited in its nature, you think that's the full deal. And then he'll reel off a load of stuff and say, look, you've only got 2 color receptors. Pigeons have got 5, so these guys are seeing more of the color spectrum than you are. You can only hear this much. You can only, and each time we do make a huge advance as a collective in our understanding, our place in the cosmos or the universe diminishes. If you think over the last 500 or 600 years, when people believed we lived under a dome, and that's, and then, oh no, hold on a minute, there's a planet over there. We live in a solar system. Oh, hold on a minute, we live in a galaxy. We live in a universe. And every time our understanding expands like that, our role gets smaller and smaller. But, equally, come back to say someone like the major dude, Alan Watts, he'd say, like, we're the aperture through which the universe looks at itself. So it's really major. But I mean, I don't know how you feel about that initial question of, like, this feeling of, like, whoa, hold on a minute, this doesn't feel earthy. It feels like it's from outside the dream, from someone who's tapping us on the shoulder going, dude, you're wearing a headset, you've got a virtual reality. I thought, oh wow.
yeah. And that's where, the whole that metaphor of enlightenment is the lifting of the veil, or you could say the lifting of the VR headset to an extent. But the point is, of course, I 100% feel that intuitively. And it especially when you just examine it, even from the narrative aspect of how Helen came to channel A Course in Miracles that Bill then captured or wrote in for her. But she had no interest in spirituality, religion. She was this older person that, just had nothing to do with it, was just like any other person. And for her to write such pure, eloquent gospel, universal gospel with no prior background or interest, it is one of the most clear manifestations of divine work that I could ever conjure up. So it has to be outside of the dream, because it's not coming from her. And of course, then it begs the question, well, what really is outside the dream? And that's what's beyond the edge of the mystery that no one knows, unless perhaps, that's what is to come next. But your metaphor of the VR headset is an interesting one, because it does point to the idea of whether this is a simulation or not. And for all intents and purposes, the more I progress on this journey, the more it seems like that very well could be the possibility that is largely supported by every field I can, start to dig my hands into. Spiritually speaking, it's supported. Quantum science, computer science. So, ancient mystics have been pointing to the illusion, Maya, of this reality. Quantum science, points to the programmatic nature of reality. Quantum physics, quantum science points to how we all dissolve into nothingness under the subatomic microscope. So this all could just be some type of, simulated experience. But even if it is, consciousness is still the one real thing that exists. Whether we are being in a simulation or not, we are aware. We are aware.
Wow.
So that's why the whole crux of the focus of spirituality for me, and I think for any true spiritual traveler, is on awareness or consciousness. And leaning deeper into consciousness, or the focus is on the ascension of consciousness, which occurs through the unlearning or unconditioning process. And that's my intuitive pull, my intuitive sense is that that's the purpose of this journey, to help us get home, to help us return to source. And that's the evolution of consciousness, which is a circularized process of energy descension into form, and then ascension back into the formlessness from which form comes. And so it's so strange how it works, but it feels intuitively so true,
I think you made a great point about Helen there, because obviously she described herself as a militant atheist, ready to go to war with anybody remotely religious.
Yeah.
And I think, if A Course in Miracles had been downloaded or scribed by somebody who was called Willow, the mother of the forest, and she wore loads of beads and tie-dyed dress and like patchouli oil and stuff, it'd be like, oh, hold on a minute, what's going on here? But the fact that it was this really prim and proper, like you say, older lady, was just like, she was having none of it, and she wasn't keen. And interestingly, the pair of them sort of pulled down the blinds at the university and locked the door and typed this stuff out, because it was just so heavily frowned upon in their circle. They were just like the last people that you would expect. But I just find that to be so incredibly sort of humorous, really. One of the great sort of jokes of the universe and consciousness. There's great humor
Absolutely.
in peace, isn't there, and in understanding and compassion. And once you don't take things seriously, and once you're not going to have a egoless day, because you've still got an ego, but stuff's going to rise up in you, and I can almost like listen to that voice and go, Okay, thanks for that. You know, if it's like really vicious or whatever it is, and then I'll think, right, I must be hungry or, you know, a bit tired because guess who's coming into the picture? Because for the most part, my vibe isn't to go to that kind of place. You know, I've become quite protective of my connection with peace.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, you do you know, the more you progress on this journey, the more you want to just the more sensitive you become to energy, because the more aware and connected you become to energy. So you know, consciousness and unconsciousness in some ways are very much like oil and water. Like it's an incompatible solution. Not that they can't exist together or coexist, but it's just more often than not, conscious people and unconscious people, you won't see them in the same room for long, you know? Um, but yeah, it's all about peace. Peace is the aim, and
Maybe get, where's the microphones? It's another one.
peace is whenever I name my ego, by the way, and
Okay, cool.
my ego's name is Fred, just because it helps me to, I don't know how Fred came about, but
Mhm.
it does help me to see the humor in things and to know it's like, ah, that's just Fred again doing his thing.
Yeah.
And, you know, the more you wake up, the more you see that this is all just a play,
Mm.
the lila, that's the divine play.
Hmm.
And we're playing in it. And the more you can see everything that's happening here in the world as play, the more you're able to play from a state of peace instead of fear.
Beautiful. That's so interesting. I was telling someone, the last guest, that I had NLP, neuro linguistic programming, to help sort of
Mm.
get past the traumas from childhood. And the practitioner was incredibly interesting to me. She was a German lady. She was super efficient. She was like quite scientific. There was nothing woo-woo about her. But what
Mm.
she did was really beautiful and really gentle. And she did exactly the same thing with the voice in my head, which I'd always seen as a presence which just was created a massive downer and spoiled everything. And she showed me that this voice actually had taken on the role of like a buffer between me and reality, that in a sense my dad should have occupied that space for me and kept the world at bay during those formative years as a child. So she got me to externalize it, and I called it worry. And then she asked me whether worry was male or female, and I said worry was a female. And then does worry know how old you are? And we started to talk about worry in like a second person sort of context, so that I could get some distance between me and that voice.
Mm.
And this is Course in Miracles stuff, isn't it? It's like, you know, you've got Fred, which is exactly the same principle, and in doing so, we separate ourselves. You know, that was one of the most incredibly liberating aspects of my interaction. My initial interaction with the course was similar to yourself. I was looking with a real thirst and a hunger. So I'd had like a spiritual identity that I'd never questioned. And I remember sort of reaching an age, like I was sort of about 14, and I remember distinctly sort of going, what is, you know, what is this feeling? What is this sense? Who am I listening to? What is going on here? And my mum had a really good book collection, so that enabled me to open some books and look and start to suss. So weirdly, then the journey started to point outwards, outside myself. And every time I found a book that said you can only follow our path and blah, 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 otherwise you're not getting in, you know, only there's a little tiny group and that's it. Everyone else is wrong. I was just like, really? Like, close the book, pick up another book. Oh, right, this is cool. Yeah, yeah. You can only come in if you're like, oh. So this went on for a while, you know, and then with the Course in Miracles, years and years later, what I realized was when it said what's all encompassing can have no opposite, that was what I was looking for. I wasn't looking for a notion that was excluding anyone or anything from this concept that I was trying to use temporarily on my road to getting beyond concepts.
Right.
And as another part of that was this liberation from the ego voice. I can remember sort of having friends in my social circle who would come to me for advice, even again as like teenager, and then afterwards you're sort of like, oh, great. I've been able to help and feel good about that. But then an hour or so later, something gets on your nerves or there's something and you just come down to this low vibration and that voice is like, oh, listen to you, you're trying to tell people information and stuff, but you haven't got it sorted. And I'd be like, you're right, I'm not living perfectly, because I couldn't separate those two aspects of the mind to go, there's the higher self, the Holy Spirit, this consciousness, there's the ego, and I'm, as a Course in Miracles likes to say, like the decision maker, or the presence that is observing what's going on and then making a decision to go left or right, up or down. And that was
Mm.
incredibly liberating for me. And coming back to listening to some of the excellent stuff that you're saying is like, that external journey then leads back inside ourselves, doesn't it? And all of these concepts and ideas and metaphors that help us to articulate something with words and form and structure are actually a journey to going past words and form and structure. And with A Course in Miracles, where it'll say, God is, and that's it. We don't try and explain God. Love is. And if you tried to explain God, you couldn't, because you haven't got any lips to speak. You haven't got any eyes to look.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
I just think that one of these great phrases that Ken Wapnick always uses is nothing as blinding as perception of form. And it'd be very easy to take that on one level and go, yeah, okay, so, I appear to be in this form, you appear to be in that form. But something that I seem to be sort of have percolating in my brain this week is like, thought is form, thought form. We say that, awareness isn't thought. Awareness is what listens to thought, what looks on thought, what is present when thought is bubbling away. And a couple of really beautiful meditations this week where I actually felt myself as like more of the pure awareness, and
Mm.
thought really died away, and it was just able to then pick up this same phrase, because it's when they say with the Course in Miracles, it's like a living document. So it meets you where you are. You'll read a line in it in the year 2021, and then and 3 years later you could read that same line and go, wow, the
Yeah.
line hasn't changed, your
Right.
understanding's changed,
Yeah. Your interpretation.
your interpretation, because you've either gathered more information or you've discarded, probably both. And yeah, to then be presented with this kind of real, like, what's the right sort of phrase I'm trying, it's a real regular kind of aspect of it, nothing so blinding as perception of form. It's been there for ages, and now to see it and to think thought forms, okay, thought is a form, nothing so blinding as perception, because it is blinding, isn't it? If you're going to look at thought as the entire picture, then you're not going to get past thought, you're not going to get past concepts.
Yeah. Yeah. Really important points you're making, Leon. And I'm really glad you brought these up, because um, this is the meat of the unconditioning, unlearning process that I think so many people get stuck at too, right? In terms of like not realizing that the mind is the fundamental issue here. Because what I mean by the mind is really, you could say it's thought, because everything exists through the mind. The mind is the filter through which all perception is perceived. And so your identification with anything is always with the thought of that thing, right? And so it's always, the mind is the fundamental error that is, or I should say, the fundamental entity that's creating the errors in the interpretation of the perception.
Brilliant.
right? And so that's why so much of this journey is a liberation from the conditioned mind, and exiting from the mind. And when you come back to reread that sentence that you checked out 3 years ago, and now you check it out again, and you have a completely different interpretation, what really is happening is, presuming you've ascended in consciousness, you've grown spiritually, what really it means is that there's less mind involved. There's less interpretation that you're interpreting. So
like magic. I love that.
like, so the fully enlightened state is the interpretationless state, meaning there is no interpretation. There just is.
That is, yeah, okay, hold on a minute. That's so good.
And that's where the Course will bring you.
I love that. That's exactly what I needed to hear to carry on from what had been bubbling away this week. Amazing. Wow. I'm going to have to ask you to continue. I'm going to need a moment.
Well, that's the way I see it in terms of the essence. But just to comment, I guess, on one other thing that you mentioned of like using concepts to move beyond conceptualization, which is what we're doing. We're using form to move beyond form into the formless. But you always have to be careful with language, in particular words, or really any concept, but words in general, the structure of our language structure. As soon as you begin to speak, you corrupt truth, because you create duality with a subject and an object. I see you. I as the subject see you as the object. And as soon as you say that, you are misrepresenting the truth of oneness of all that is, the non-duality of existence. And so, we have to be very careful not to get hung up on words, and to remember that they're just pointers to the truth. They're signposts. Every concept is a signpost. Every teaching I share on Awakenpedia, every word I share, everything I say is simply a signpost that points to that which cannot be spoken. And you have to realize that essence within you, to which the words point.
Beautiful. Absolutely love that. Wow.
I'm glad it's resonating. The things I'm saying resonating with you, Leon.
Absolutely, yeah. Beautiful. Yeah, absolutely essential to my sort of self-study of the week, really. Yeah. And one thing that I really love to do on in a lot of contexts really is I like to reflect on a journey, in a sense. I guess what the process is like I look back on my perception of a linear sequence of events that leads me to a point where I am now. And it's almost like something I like to do, like sitting down with a cup of tea or something, and just thinking, wow, I met that guy because I went to that place on that day, and I went to that place on that day because my friend told me to go there, and they went there, and it collapses the sequence of linear time, and then you can reflect at it all from where you are. None of it exists anymore, and interestingly, we have this obsession with like the now being sandwiched between the past and the future, but we know that that's not actually the case, because the now is all that exists, as your tattoo
That's right.
can testify.
You maybe I can't. It's probably backwards.
You won. What did you win?
Yeah, there it is. And I have the I am on this one. You probably can't see it either, but
Awesome.
I got I am and the now, just to remind me of who I am.
And who Fred isn't.
and who Fred is not. Yeah.
So yeah, I think the expansiveness of our understanding is our yardstick, isn't it? We look back on stuff. Everything plays a part. All of these steps seem to be like the only step at the time. And some of the places we've been to in the past when you can't see any change on the horizon, we can be we can be completely trapped within the idea that things aren't going to evolve and aren't going to change. But in fact, flux is the only reality, isn't it, really, in terms of there is nothing static, there's nothing that's the same in this moment to a moment that we've just shared 5 minutes ago. It's just a complete movement of energy and interplay of energy. And I love the emphasis you're putting on play as well, because say from my wife and I, our perspective as we've helped one another with conversation and with the security of a loving relationship to do the self work, and then we've done work together as a couple. The consequence of that is obviously peace, happiness, and play, and just like laughing our heads off and pissing ourselves laughing all the time, and just something that could be deemed a chore. Let's go shopping. We'll go shopping and like go around the supermarket and just have a gas and a ball, and everything is the same equation in terms of what you can get out of it, in terms of fun, peace, joy, marveling. I seem to be getting more and more interested in looking at the clouds in the sky as every day goes by.
Yeah. Yeah.
The natural
Well,
world.
I mean, when you begin to wake up and lean into that awakening,
Mm,
and you grow in consciousness, as you continue to ascend, the ordinary increasingly becomes extraordinary.
mm,
And so the simple little things in life becomes full of so much flavor, so much life, because you realize that everything's alive. There's no thing in this world that's not alive when consciousness is life, right? So the rock is as alive as us.
mm.
Um, it's just a different vibration. It's a different frequency of life through which it's expressed. Um,
And again, the entirety is in that rock. The entirety of creation's in a grain of sand. It's in a particle that we can't see without a subatomic microscope. There's no separation, there's no division, there's no hierarchy,
yeah.
holographic reality of oneness, really. And like Rupert Spira, are you a fan of Rupert Spira?
Yes, yes. I found him recently and I really enjoy his creations there.
Man, he's so good.
He,
So
he sees it. He sees it.
he does see it. So his kind of mic drop moment is to say peace and happiness are the essence of our being, and we share our being with everyone and everything. And it's like, there you go. Rupert's dropped the mic. He's out the room.
Yeah,
So
yeah,
tell us a bit about Awakenpedia so that people know how to tap into what you're putting together. Because I know about it and I've seen your content. I follow you on Instagram, and whenever anything of yours comes up in my feed, one, I recognize it because the beautiful colors, the very natural, organic sort of tones.
mm,
Two, it makes me stop in my tracks because I know I'm going to read something that's got a frequency of truth about it, and it's going to be something that's worth reading. Um, and I'd just like you to be able to sort of pass on to people watching how they can tap into that as well, because I can certainly recommend it as something that's got the air of A Course in Miracle. When I read it, I'm like, oh, okay, this guy knows about A Course in Miracles. It's got the vibe. Um,
yeah,
yeah, please tell us
yeah.
about where we can
Thank
find
you.
what you're
Thank you
doing.
for your kind words and affirming the mission
All
and
true,
uh,
all true.
yeah, thank you. Um, and certainly inspired through my studies and transformation that's been catalyzed uh, by A Course in Miracles. I even, in my writings, written teachings, I capitalize it similarly as Bill did and Helen, in terms of just knowing, right? Because there's a very important distinguishing factor between some, capitalized word or uncapitalized, self versus self. I mean, you're talking about the opposite things, right? So I'm very careful in particular about my word choice and how I communicate truth. And so that's just to say that it carries the flavor of A Course in Miracles.
Absolutely.
And the design of how it started and what it's been growing out of just the written portion into more inclusive multimedia format with audio and video and various other things, meditation training. But the written portion itself is actually a completely interlinked ecosystem that's been designed to support the one truth. So every written teaching on there, it's a hyperlinked, similar to the Bible. Of course, that's physical and not online, but they cross-reference all the time because concepts ultimately are all used in order to transcend conceptualization. So whether I have a teaching on presence as the teaching itself, or on consciousness, or on awareness, or on the ego, or on breathing, or on heartbreak, or anything it is, everything is being written and channeled, because it is being channeled in order to help you realize the truth, in order to help you transcend what is not true through the realization of what is true, which means to say it's to correct your misinterpretations of reality. And they all end up helping you to see who you really are. So that's what Awakenpedia is for. And if you really dive into Awakenpedia and just kind of like poke around, check out different teachings, you'll see what I mean by being an interlinked, hyperlinked ecosystem that's been circularly designed in order to help you unlearn, in order to know the truth, right?
Wow.
So I just suggest that, there's a bunch of, for those who are curious, check it out, just play around to see, the various teachings, and you'll get a sense of what my mission is, my aim with doing this and writing these things. It's to help you realize who you are, which is what the course aims to do as well, right? It's to help you realize who you are so that you can come back home. And Leon, I'd be remiss if I didn't really emphasize the way in which these teachings come about. But what I do is I go out into usually a quiet place, some type of natural environment, usually of sorts, but it doesn't really matter. But somewhere I go where I feel calm, and I quiet the voice in my head, which is the voice of Fred, the voice of the ego, the mental chatterbox, so that I can become still. And through the stillness is when I can hear the whisper of the inner voice, and it becomes so clear that I then simply capture whatever comes into the mind. Wow. That's being channeled into the mind. And I have a notepad with a pen, and everything is scribed. And then I just dictate that into the computer, and I upload it as the teaching. So it's unedited. And that's why there's a lot of grammar mistakes and various other things. But the point is that I want to leave it pure and unaltered and authentic, because I know that if I come into it, I'm going to mess it up. I'm going to corrupt it. So I'm leaving it pure. And that's why I have such strong faith in the teachings, because I know that it's not coming from me. Similar to Helen, I know for her, it was coming from beyond her. These are coming from beyond me.
Nice.
Yeah.
Well, that reminds me of something you were saying earlier about that same process, and how I can relate to that as a musician. Of like, I have this sense that the song already exists. A bit like when we hear a sculptor saying that they felt the statue was always in the piece of stone, and they just had to chip off what was
Mm.
outside and find the sculpture. You know, I'll get that with the songs that I write. I'll feel like they're already in existence, and I just need to dust off the interference that stopped me from seeing them or having a relationship with them or connecting with them. And then there's something beautiful about that for me, because by not taking ownership of the song, I'm able to be a participant in the audience and look at the song in an egoless way, so much so that I could, you know, I could have written a song and you could like it and you turn around to me and go, man, I really love that song. And I could look at you and go, I know, yeah, I really love it too. It's amazing, isn't it? And not in a way where I go, of course, yes, I love it. You know, I wrote it, darling. You know, it's amazing. You know, and that is such an important part of my creative process, and in terms of the enjoyment of it, because I don't have to take ownership of it in that way. You know, I can just appreciate it by removing myself from the equation, by stepping out. And I do a lot of similar writing myself in the morning with my meditation. So I tend to like I just kept going with the workbook, because with A Course in Miracles, I read the text over and over for about 27 years or something without doing the
Wow.
workbook. I tried the workbook in 1994, and I just didn't connect. I got so far in one of the lessons. It says you should start to see like a glow around things and stuff. And I was quite young. I don't know what, you know, if I'd have been like 22 or something. And when I didn't get those immediate results, I thought, oh, this isn't working, or I'm not doing it properly.
Mm.
And I didn't pursue the workbook. So I just like the text and the text and the text and the text. And when I did start the workbook, then I went through it again, and now I'm sort of on it for like the third time round. So I'll have done, you know, 950 lessons on the bounce kind of thing now, and I'm really like I said, that's a big part of the piece. Is like the application of this knowledge. It's like, yeah, I read it. I was like, wow, this is incredible. I get it. But now, with the workbook running concurrently with the study of the text, there's the evidence. That's the experiment that shows me. And my wife said to me, you're not the same person now these days than you were even like 6 months ago or a year ago. She can see that evolutionary change through implementing this system. And, you know, sitting there in the morning, doing a meditation, closing the book, and then I'll start to hear, like exactly like you're describing, from the silence, this voice coming into my head. And I'll start to hear myself kind of formulate a prayer, if you like. And
Mhm.
I think even this morning, I was like, oh, hold on a minute, I better go and get my phone. And then I'll go and get my phone and get the voice recorder and just sort of hold it there and drop back to where I was and just record it for myself, just to hear it back, because it doesn't feel like I sat there and went, diddle diddle diddle, you know, I can press play afterwards or a day or two later when it's not so present in my memory and think, wow, that's brilliant. I love that, you know. And it's the same principle of exactly what you're describing, just the little self, the little S steps out, and then
Right.
the other voice can come in.
Yeah. Yeah. It's
Connect to outside the virtual reality headset.
yeah. It's uh it's great to hear that's how your process of creation follows a
Mm,
similar vibe,
mm,
similar style,
mm,
because I intuitively feel that that is the most natural, pure process of any true creation, any artist,
mm,
whatever art form you're creating, for the genius be to flow into that painting, let's say,
yeah,
for
exactly.
that to be captured, which is then when someone walks by and sees a picture of a circle, how could that be something that's so valuable or mean or move you so much?
Mm,
It's because the quality of the consciousness that flew that was, you know, put into the painting, that was flowing into the painting,
mm,
is what you're feeling.
mm,
And so, and that's a direct function of how much you can get out of the way. so that the genius can flow into it. And
That's a great leveler as well, because that could be somebody mowing a lawn, or somebody cutting somebody's hair, or somebody building a
yeah,
temple or a bridge or a song. That's a wonderful way for equality to be present and fundamental in all of that creation, isn't it?
yeah. And Leon, I I feel sometimes like very strongly about where we're headed as a species in terms of the next phase of evolution.
Mm.
And I sense that we are, that what you just described is what I call awakened doing, which is coined by Eckhart Tolle, which is to point to exactly that. It's it's bringing the being into the doing, so that doing is now done from a state of high consciousness doing. No longer is it egoic doing, which is being fueled from a state of fear and greed and every other emotion. But now it's love that's flowing into the doing. Regardless of whatever is being done, the
Mm.
doing is happening from a place of love. And if you do from that place, it will be felt. So whether you're cutting hair or mowing the lawn or creating the world's next most renowned painting or creating a podcast, the quality of the consciousness that flows into its creation is going to be the primary determinant of how of its success. And that's what we're talking about, which is like redefining what it means to be successful in the new age, which is going to be a function of peace, not money.
Well, my last guest, Maureen Muldoon, fantastic teacher of A Course in Miracles, really lovely, upbeat, fun person. And we were having this similar discussion, and she said, when something's got the thumbprint of God on it, and I was just like, oh, I love that, the thumbprint of God. I was like, that's
Yeah,
stuck with me since.
yeah, that's nice.
Wow. So, what an amazing conversation. So lovely to actually connect face to face after knowing each other for, I guess, like getting on for half a year or a year or
Yeah,
whatever. So,
yeah, somewhere around there.
yeah, I'm very grateful to you for that initial reaching out, and I'm grateful to whoever to being guided to put hashtag ACIM on whatever I did. Which made me come up in your feed. So the Course
Yeah.
of Miracles has brought us together, a friendship that's been growing and certainly will be accelerated as of this wonderful time that we've spent together. I'm really grateful that you spent this hour or so with me, and I hope you have a beautiful rest of the day, whatever you're going to do. What's on the cards for the rest of the day?
We have a fire pit here that's yet to be used, so probably light a fire and hang out, maybe listen to some music and
Awesome.
cook up a nice meal.
Awesome. There you go. Simple pleasures are the main dish of the day. Excuse me.
It's what it's about, just being, just whatever I do ultimately is secondary to the being that the presence that I bring into it. So thank you so much for inviting me, for bestowing the faith in me to have me on this chat and this podcast with you. And I agree, echo everything you said. Likewise, I look forward to seeing how our relationship develops over time and how we can continue to serve each other on our way home. So thank you.
Yeah, beautiful. Beautifully put. Thank you very much indeed. Take care.
All right. Bye-bye.